and welcome to the Hero Report podcast. My name is Ari Cohen. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska, and with me, after a long, long time, my good friend from down under, Matt Langdon. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, I think it's probably been over a year. Does that sound right?
Not since we've been together, but perhaps since we've done a Hero Report podcast. We've certainly seen one another at Hero Roundtable conference and here on the old Skype, but we haven't recorded one of our conversations for posterity. But now, of course, we got the band back together because in a galaxy far, far away, our best friends have come back.
Yes, they have. Rogue One. Is Rogue One a new name, or was it mentioned in any previous movies?
That's a great question. I wish you had told me that was how we were starting. I feel like I'm caught flat-footed. I should know this. Certainly, there is a Rogue Squadron, but I'll be honest. I don't think there would be a Rogue One, right? If there was a Rogue Squadron, you would have Rogue Leader, and then you'd probably have a Rogue Two. Would be my guess, but I'm sure people. We're going to get letters on this one.
Well, I was just going to say I love Star Wars, but you have another level of Star Wars, so details and world lore will be coming from you.
Yeah, I have a disease, and the only cure is more Star Wars. I love it. I really do. It hooked me at just the right age, and it's an addiction I just can't get over. Which is lucky for me. I don't have to anymore. It used to be the case that there was basically no Star Wars to be had. I was kind of stuck with those three movies, which of course I loved, and then the various permutations of those movies that George Lucas released over and over with different scenes that he cut into them. And then, of course, I was given the prequels, which was a bit of a blessing and also a curse. Because, of course, they were terrible. But I have to say, when I saw them, I liked them. On later reflection, I came to understand how truly terrible they are.
That's interesting. How did you get through to watching the third prequel and not have realized that they were all terrible at that point?
Oh, no. That's not how it worked. I went and saw the first one, and I thought, oh, that was kind of fun. I wish that there had been like 35 minutes less of the pod racing, but nonetheless, it was kind of fun. I didn't understand why the stakes were what they were. I thought that the whole thing was probably not what I had hoped for, but it was more of the Star Wars story, and so I was okay with it. When I saw the second one, during while I was watching it, I thought, okay, this is more of the story, and that's good. But as soon as I walked out with a friend, I thought, well, this was objectively terrible, right? I mean, this was a bad film. I don't know why they're advancing the story in this way. I don't know why we're doing this with the characters. None of it matters. But nonetheless, I still went to see the third one because, I'm a completist. I watch everything, and so there it was. I thought the third one was the best of the three. But, still the acting was terrible. The dialogue was bad, and the stakes were low, right? I mean, the reason that it didn't work was the reason that the first three did work, right? Because the stakes were really high in the first three movies. Everything mattered because it was it was light versus dark, good versus evil, the people versus the empire. And you don't have any of that really in the first three movies, and you also don't. I mean, most importantly for us, you don't have a hero. There's no hero in the prequels, and that's why they failed. If anybody should have known that, it was George Lucas, who did such a good job, especially with A New Hope, because that was the quintessential hero story. I mean, he basically went to Joseph Campbell and said, okay, what are the beats I have to hit? And then he hit them all, which is why people who watched that movie, especially people of a certain age, it really resonates. It's the perfect hero's journey, and all of that, it just collapsed.
Yeah, George seemed to miss that memo for the prequels. But I distinctly remember deciding to leave that third prequel while watching it and thought, maybe I'll just see how they tie all this up, just because it could be important later in my life to know how they did it. But man, they were some terrible films. Which brings us to the latest film. And it sounds like I had a similar reaction to your reaction to the second prequel. Was I enjoyed it, but I walked out and thought, there's nothing. There's nothing to make me want to rewatch this movie. Actually, what I thought was, I'll come back and see it one more time to pick up anything that I missed in the various call-outs to the fans. But it seems that I didn't actually miss any of the call-outs that I would ever get, because anything I missed was because I haven't watched or played Star Wars video games or animated shows, contrary to your experience.
Yeah. So we had obviously a very different experience of this movie, and it might be because for me, this movie did hit a bunch of the beats of the hero story that I was looking for, and it's a different hero story from A New Hope, or maybe even that original trilogy, right? The full arc of Luke Skywalker from 4, 5, and 6. And this was a hero story that really resonated with me because it resonated with the kind of research that I do on heroism and mortality. And I've been reflecting on that a lot over the last couple of days since I saw the film, because I wondered why we had such different reactions. And in part, I think it's because we originally approached the study and teaching of heroism from different angles. Yours is a lot about empowerment and about kind of, I think, motivating especially young people to be everyday heroes, right? To stand up for others and to take the kind of steps that you might find in a hero's journey, to find mentors, to cross the threshold, all the great kind of Joseph Campbell monomyth beats that you see in episode 4. Whereas for me, I go back to a different reading of the classics, the classic hero stories. I'm more Achilles than Odysseus. When it comes to hero stories, my heroes don't survive. They are the heroes who stand for a principle and who ultimately not simply risk everything, but pay everything in order to accomplish the thing that they feel they have to accomplish. And so for me, Rogue One really stood out in hitting that point in a way that none of the other Star Wars films have done. And so there was something really poignant about that for me, especially because I just finished on Friday the exams for a course on heroism at Nebraska, where I talked to my students all about mortality, and we read the classics. We read the Iliad, we read the Odyssey, we read the trial and death of Socrates, we read Antigone, all of these phenomenal classic works about that are ultimately about mortality for me, right? They're hero stories where the hero has to make a life or death decision. And ultimately, Rogue One is a story of a suicide mission that's built on principle. I think that we can certainly nitpick and quibble with some of the decisions that were made. I think that there were a lot of problems with the film, and I don't want to gloss over or downgrade those. But for me, the central kind of defining feature of the story was that it was a different kind of hero story from the Skywalker story that has dominated the Star Wars universe for 30 some years.
Yeah, that is. That's funny that that's funny that you're coming at that, because I was actually thinking about some of this in the hours leading up to this conversation. We should tell everyone that there's almost certainly every sentence we say is going to be a spoiler from here on in. I was thinking about how many different types of death there was, in the sense that there were completely sort of wasted deaths. There were, and then there were a lot of sort of noble, glorious deaths where they made a conscious decision to sacrifice their life. But it was made. There were different deaths, right? There were deaths sacrificing for a greater cause, for my friend, for the Empire, for the rebellion. That's maybe I am going to see it again. It is, yeah. There was that and I think that it started with the thinking started with the little girl that Jyn saved, and her decision to save that girl, but then that girl dies in a Death Star blast anyway.
That's right. And for me, this really underscores so much of what I talk about with my students, and that is the point that look, everybody's going to die, right? I mean, the fundamental feature in all of this is that everyone dies. Human beings have a very finite amount of time, yeah? And choices matter as a result of that. And Jyn is going to die, and that little girl is going to die, and there's no reason for Jyn to run out into the field of fire to save that little girl, but she has to do it because that's who she is, right? And it's going to matter later on that that's who she is, even though that girl, saving the girl's life doesn't ultimately matter for the girl. It doesn't buy her very much more time, right? But the principle is that when Jyn sees that girl, she has to go rescue her. And I think that those are the kinds of points that give you something about a character without telling you. And that's why I thought that this movie worked in a lot of ways that the prequels, for example, absolutely failed, right? The prequels had to tell you everything, or else they didn't make any sense. And here, it's a one-off story. They could show you some things, they could not explain other things, and it was enough, right? Donnie Yen's character, the warrior monk or whatever. I don't know anything about that guy, right? I don't know where he comes from. I don't know what his, what's he doing there on Jedha? What's his purpose? He's guarding the old temple. He's just hanging out in the streets with his buddy. It doesn't matter. I mean, we could have like a whole TV show devoted to the many adventures of that guy and his friend with the giant guns. I'd be okay with that. They could have their own cartoon series. I think it'd be fun. But the things that they allowed him to do in the limited amount of time that he had left in his life, I think those were really interesting things. And so, part of what I want to get away from as a Star Wars fan is having to know everything. Because I think that was the ultimate downfall of George Lucas with the prequels. He felt like we had to have all the answers. And I think that was the biggest mistake. Because there was nothing that he could tell us that would have given us the kind of feeling we wanted, that would explain how the Empire arose and where Darth Vader came from. Darth Vader was much scarier in Rogue One, because I kind of forgot, I let myself forget all the Anakin Skywalker nonsense from the prequels, and I just focused on this masked monster, right? And he was terrifying. He was the same terror that you got in the beginning of A New Hope, right? When he just comes into that ship and tears that place apart. And he did it here again. And that, like, I don't want like his love story, right? He's the villain, and it's okay to just have him be a kind of unadulterated bad guy. So I hope we do get back to that place. I'm worried about like the Han Solo adventures for precisely this reason. I don't really like. The only way I'll be happy with Han Solo backstory is if it's just like good times, this guy and his furry buddy like going around the galaxy, doing cool stuff. Like that's the only way I'm okay with it. I don't want to know like what makes Han tick.
Oh, we're going to find out a lot of ticks.
I don't know. I hope we can get away from that.
Yeah, I think the other piece where people were willing to give up their lives was this sort of fractured rebellion piece as well on the planet Jedha, where you had this freedom fighter group that were clearly, they were fighting underneath a Star Destroyer, so they were not in a very strong position generally, but they were absolutely willing to give up their lives for the cause there. Even that very first scene with is it Cassian, the pilot, this sort of we've got to get out of here. This guy's injured. Bam, he's done. I guess there's a lot of different ways that people die in this movie, and I don't know. I wish that we'd been given more sort of.
I'm so excited. I turned you. I'm so excited. Because you're going to go watch it again, because I want you to watch that speech that Cassian gives. That Diego Luna speech when he rallies those guys and follows Jyn. It's incredible, right? Because what he's talking about is he's done all these terrible things, right? Like he's done things that like because he believed really strongly. This is this really fine line between heroism and fanaticism. Maybe this fine line between heroism and villainy, where heroes and villains are both fanatics, right? And the only way that Anakin Skywalker works, by the way, is if you think about that fine line, right? That Anakin is a fanatic about order, yeah, and he goes back and forth between heroism and villainy until finally he's pushed over the edge. And that's why the Clone Wars TV show is good, right? You should watch, if you haven't watched the whole thing, you should watch the whole thing, because it's Anakin threading that needle, going back and forth across this line of heroism and villainy. That speech that Cassian Andor gives is awesome. It's a great speech. It's really well written and it's really well acted. And it just highlights all these men that he brought with him have this problem of what to do with themselves, right? Because they've given their souls, in a sense, to the rebellion, right? And it has to count for something, right? Like it has to amount to something. Otherwise, what did they do those things for? Those things they know that weren't right, right? And I mean, that guy that he shot in the alley, he shouldn't have killed that guy, right? But he had to, because the rebellion needed him to be alive. He had to get out of there, and that other guy wasn't getting out. It's all for the rebellion, right? So that's why I just think they did. I mean, look, they didn't knock it out of the park. This is not a grand slam, but the things that they hit, the things on second viewing, on another reflection of it, I really think it's two good things. It's a good war movie, and it's a good movie about heroism. And heroism in two ways, right? This sacrificing, but also this potentially troubling side of heroism that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, where there is like a kind of subservience to an ideal, to something bigger than yourself, that when it's in the service of the things that are right, well, that makes sense, and it's allowable. But we have to recognize that they could also be in the service of things that we think are wrong, and then it's really troubling, right? And this is where Saw Gerrera and Cassian Andor, like they embody this, I think, right? This real trouble where, excuse me, the politicians want to kind of be above it, right? Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, they want to say, well, they're still, I mean, look, at this point, they're still senators, right? And they're leading this rebellion, but they're still also members of the Senate. And they want to pull back. They don't want to do this dangerous thing that could fail. I don't know. For me, I think it gives us these fascinating moments.
Yeah, so I guess I was absolutely analyzing it on whether it was a well done story and film, and I think it failed in a lot of different ways. But these are definitely some interesting pieces, and I think there was the clear hope motif through the story. It was brought up, and that was the hammer of hope, because presumably it's leading to a new hope. But there was also a lot of trust issues. Characters initially, just not trusting anyone until they were given a reason, or which was started with Jyn for sure. She didn't trust anyone. Cassian didn't trust that Jyn's dad had actually done the right thing here. Forrest Whitaker's character didn't trust that the pilot was legit. I mean, it was over and over and over. Except for the human spiritual droids, who seemed to just join in the team without any question that they were doing the right thing. And maybe that's part of the blind guy's death as well, is he just trusted that he was doing the right thing. The Force would look after him. Yeah. Maybe I need to go and see this again over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going back. And look, it might not hold up as well for me the second time. That's a possibility. I mean, clearly there are flaws because the way that this movie was put together was clearly problematic. And those, the seams of the movie kind of showed in places. There's no doubt about that, right? You could see where two different people had their hands in it, and we all know, of course, that scenes from the previews, from the trailers, didn't show up in the film, and the story was likely different. Characters likely had different moments and different business to do. I think there were a lot of misses that we've talked about off podcast. I wish that the pilot had more to do, because I mean, personally, I really like the actor Riz Ahmed. I think he's a great actor, and I think that there was a lot more business he could have done. He played a great role in the end, as they were approaching the conclusion of their story, but there was more he could have done. And I think that the entire Saw Gerrera storyline didn't pan out. I don't know what they were thinking, but it didn't, which was too bad, because of course he was the character that if you watch the cartoons, the people were waiting for Saw Gerrera. Nonetheless, I do think, for me anyway, the story didn't have very many places it could go, right? We started at point A and we were going to end up at point B. It was just a question of where would how they were going to get from one thing to the other. I know that you had more problems with the story as a story than I did. but for me, I don't know what else they would have done with it, right? It was a very narrow thing. It was designed to be a one-off, 2 hour, the end.
Right, right. The other character that maybe stands out in this theme too is the droid, who was this, enormous smartass the whole time, smartass pessimist the whole time, and ended up having this noble, sacrificial death as well. So it is, yeah. I mean, I think when you lay all these people figuratively down by each other, you can see each one had made a decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to leave people with, right? If we don't do anything else, this is a movie about dying, right? There is no doubt about that. In the same way that, like, Saving Private Ryan is a movie about dying, right? It's a movie about battles and death, and the way that a battle serves as like an inflection point for somebody's life, right? And everybody, all of the characters, really had these interesting, thoughtful deaths, right? I mean, if you think about the kind of buddies from Jedha, right, whose names I won't pronounce properly, but these two guys were, one of them was the, a kind of Force adherent, right? I don't think he was a Force user, but he certainly subscribed to that philosophy, and his friend didn't, right? Except that in his death, he repeats that same mantra that his friend repeated throughout his life. As you say, the droid had this really poignant, sacrificial death where, he accomplishes everything he needs to accomplish, and he sends the other two characters on their way to finish their task. For me, I really thought the only person who didn't have a great death sequence is Saw Gerrera. He dies too, but it was a throwaway. In the same way that I think Forrest Whitaker's character generally was a throwaway. He was there as like a set piece. Like here he is, this interesting thing with mechanical body and this oxygen mask or whatever, and he's got all this business to do, but it doesn't amount to anything, right? Like none of that mattered. It was it was the Jabba's palace from Return of the Jedi of Rogue One, right? None of that business really mattered. It just got rid of a character who didn't really have much to do anyway. But all the other characters I thought had really, really interesting deaths. Even the guys who I don't even know what their names were, right? Those kind of mercenary rebellion guys who joined up. The ways that they participated in that final battle, I thought were really meaningful.
What about Ben Mendelsohn's character's death? What do we think about that? Because he was interestingly drawn as well, because he was the bad guy, but what it turned out was it was sort of just hubris, right? He just wanted to be acknowledged for his accomplishments, and he wanted to rise up the ranks, and no one ever showed him any respect. And then, his death was to prevent. He was basically investigating what had been transmitted, right? What data had been transmitted to save his creation, and then his creation turned up and killed him.
Right.
So, yeah, even he had an interesting death that I think was maybe a little less interesting than it probably was in the original run through. That whole top of the tower scene seemed cobbled together. Even with Cassian coming back at the last second, I think his death, even though he shared a memorable death with Jyn at the end, his death protecting her was a much better decision, I think, or it immediately reflected his decision, right? So the droid gave up his life so the two could keep going. Cassian gave up his life so that Jyn could keep going. It was a bit like the final scene with the rebel, whatever they are, pilots or soldiers or whatever, one by one getting the plans out from Vader.
Right, and it's the same scene. It's the same sequence from A New Hope, right? As the pilots, all the different pilots who are accompanying Luke down the canyon on the Death Star, one by one, they either are killed by Vader and his co-pilot and his other pilots from TIE fighters, or in the case of, I think it was Wedge Antilles, has to obviously break off until Luke goes on his own. I wonder if they were resisting that, right, in the writing, right, in having the one person on her own. I think obviously there would have been tons of ways for them to work Jyn being victorious against Krennic on her own. They just didn't. It's a quicker out to have Cassian show up and shoot him. But I thought there was something poignant in his own technological terror coming back and killing him, right? This thing he was so proud of. That scene where he and Tarkin are having this, this sort of tug of war over who's right. And then, of course, he's proven right when they destroy Jeddah City. And then, of course, he's targeted by the same weapon in the same way, right? Single fire. It's precisely the same. So, I thought that there was something sort of poignant about that. In any case, even though he's the bad guy, he's I don't know. I mean, I don't know what kind of a bad guy he is, right? I would need to defer to the villain experts, but I can't tell if he's one of these bad guys that I find sort of interesting, because I can't tell if he's a fanatic, right? If he really believes in what the Empire is doing, or if he's kind of like a glorified bureaucrat who's doing his job and wants to do it well and get recognized for succeeding. I don't know the answer, right? In a sense, with other Star Wars bad guys, but not so much with Krennic. I think it's not clear.
So I think the message for viewers that have made it this far is the idea of living a life, a deliberate life, and having a deliberate death, I guess. One other piece that I immediately was concerned about, and I think you've expressed it as well, is the lack of agency that Jyn has as the main character of the story. That really there's not a lot that she is in control of. She makes a couple of decisions, but taking away from the story part, but what value do you put on agency in living our lives, our good lives, our lives of a hero, a potential hero?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, agency matters a lot, right? There's no doubt about that. But I was reminded again, talking with my students this semester, they were very good. And they pointed out, like, in all of these cases where we have these decisions that are made by heroes, we have to wonder really how much agency they ultimately have, right? I'm thinking about the ancient Greeks who believed that, fate played a massive role in people's lives, and there was really only so much you could do, right? Achilles has two destinies, so he has a choice, right? But the idea of these two destinies is very, very rare. And once Achilles makes his choice, that's the end, right? Then he's locked in. He seems to think that he's not, right? That he still possesses the agency to go back and to change what he has chosen, but he's wrong, right? He decides we're witnessing the end of his life, really the penultimate chapter in his life, in the Iliad. But the decision he made to go to Troy, that was really the moment when he ended his life, right? The rest of it was just playing out the string. So how much agency does anybody really have, right? He's just a boy, ultimately, when he chooses to go fight in that war. How much agency we have, we all think that we're agents, right? That everything we do, like, we're choosing all the time. And so, we imbue those choices with like this incredible power. But how much is determined by factors that are beyond our control? Probably a lot, right? Probably a real lot.
Sam Harris is someone who doesn't think we have any free choice, right? So there's definitely that school of thought too, that everything we do is based on biology and environment. But there's a clear difference between just sort of living your life and waking up, doing the things that need to be done, and going back to sleep again. What is your thought on being more deliberate about living a life? I mean, maybe this is the topic for the next podcast, because that's a pretty big question. What is the heroic life? But there's a clear difference between people who decide, I'm going to do something that's not just feeding my base needs. There's something else. There's something outside of me that needs my attention.
Yeah, that is definitely the topic for our next podcast. So people should tune in, because we're going to start doing these more regularly, I should say, right? I think we've found a time that works, and my hope is that we'll be able to do these more regularly, get back into the old swing of things. Briefly, I think that all you can do is work within the choices that you feel you have, right? I'm not a hard determinist in the way that you're talking about. I don't happen to think that everything is already hardwired and pre-programmed. But even if it were the case, we still have the experience of agency, right? Whether or not we actually have that agency, we nonetheless have the experience of it. That's part of maybe a trick that our brain is playing on us, so that we, live our lives. And given that, I think that experience of agency is really all that matters, even if hard determinism turns out to have been true. We nonetheless experience our choices as very real, right? It might be the case that I can't choose otherwise, right? I'm always going down path A, but I feel that I have path A or path B, and because I have that feeling, I'm still telling myself there's a reason I'm picking A and not B. And I think that story that we tell ourselves, even if hard determinism turns out to be the case, that story we tell ourselves is nonetheless quite important. Now, as someone who is not himself a hard determinist, I think it's more than simply a story we're telling ourselves. I do think we have a range of choices that they might be bounded, right? We might not have the widest range of choices, but even within that sort of bounded set, nonetheless, I think the choices that we make, those are important. So we can look. I think we could spend a lot of time talking about that, and I think it's important that we do. I'm glad that Rogue One brings up these kinds of questions. I think it shows what is my feeling on the topic, which is that Rogue One rises pretty high for me in the pantheon of these movies in this universe. I might be putting it at number 3 of the Star Wars movies, behind Empire and A New Hope.
I'm obviously going to see it again, and if you're one of the other 6 people in the world that didn't enjoy it the first time, maybe you should join me in watching again for a different experience.
Yeah, and send us a note. Write to us on Twitter. I'm at Cohen Ari, and he's at The Hero CC. And obviously you can comment on this when it's posted as well. You'll find it on Twitter. You'll find it on Facebook, and before that, you'll find it on Patreon, if I'm correct about that. Do you want to tell us a little about that, Matt, before we go?
That is correct. This will be going up to our Patreon patrons before going out into the wider world. We're not really sure where or how it's going out into the wider world, whether it'll be up on HeroReport.com or not. I did, completely tangential to that, I did see that we did do one other podcast this year. It was in January, but the podcast before that was for Force Awakens, so 1 year and 3 days ago. So Star Wars brings us out.
We're nothing if not consistent.
Right. So, you can contribute to our Patreon campaign, which is funding the building of hero training programs for free for people around the world. Patreon.com/hero construction. And pretty soon we're going to start getting some guests on the show again. I spoke to Angie Hobbs yesterday, who's keen to get on here, and we'll have to try to do maybe our second or third triple continent hero report.
Yeah, and she's really worth the trouble of scheduling that. She is a fantastic philosopher, researcher on heroism, has a great book on Plato and the hero that people who are interested in this topic really ought to check out. So I do hope we get that podcast up and going. That would be a fantastic conversation.
For sure. Well, when you two connect, make sure you bring that up to her again. And everyone else, leave comments and for future guests, for future topics, and we'll see you again soon.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.